till now we have seen about doing everything from the UI. Okay, but in the real time, dashboard is not every organization will have the dashboard deployed in Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so what you can do is most of the times you will be doing things in the command line. So first, let's start with creating a deployment from the command line. Then we will play around with the deployment. So let's start this first. So how can I write a deployment file? This is very much important. Okay. So let me go into the US batch 2 and there I have the kubectl.exe. Okay, fine. So here, let me go into the respective directory. Yesterday we have downloaded kubectl and kept it in a directory, right? I'll go to that particular directory. First, let me create a YAML file to deploy a application. So let me call it as first app.yaml, and there let me start writing the deployment YAML. So the first line of the YAML will be API version is apps/v1. So I know that the API reference document I have shared earlier. So for deployments, the API version is apps/v1 and the kind is deployment. Kind is deployment and metadata for the deployment is. So for the deployment, I'm going to create a name and I'm going to create a label. Okay. So name of the deployment is, let me call it as Nginx -deployment and labels and I need to provide the specifications or specs for the particular deployment. This is where I'm going to define what is the image I should be using, what will be the port number it will be listening on, all those things I'm going to do. Okay, and specs is, and the first spec I'm going to provide is how many replicas I need to have. Okay, so the replicas is 4, and next is I'm going to match this to a template. Okay, so let's use that selector. I'm going to match it to a match labels. So I'm going to match this to the label Nginx. Then I'm going to define the template for the deployment. Right. The metadata and I'm going to create a label. I'm going to use the same thing across. Okay. And then for the template, I need to provide the specs. And for the template, I'm going to, for the specs for the template, it will be minus and name of the container is, name it as img pod. Then the image I want it to be using is Linux, and ports. Let me define the container port. Okay. So this is my deployment YAML. So the API version is apps v1, kind is deployment, and metadata for the deployment where I'm writing a label for the deployment, and also the name of the deployment is Nginx deployment, and specs for the deployment. I want 4 replicas, and it should map it to the template. The template label is this, okay, and the specification for the template is it should bring up one container, okay, and the name of the container will be Nginx pod, and the image it should use is Nginx, and the container will be listening on port 80. In the same file, I am going to write the service. So it's a best practice in Kubernetes that whenever you are doing a deployment, define the dependent service in the same deployment YAML, so that for every service you will have a single deployment file. Okay, on a simple application you can use it, or if you're having a complex one, you can create a folder and put all the deployment YAMLs in the respective folder. But for a simple microservice application, try to write it to a single file. Okay, and to differentiate two different resources, you can use the 3 hyphens. In YAML, 3 hyphens represents the end of the particular block. So the API version for service will be v1 kind is service metadata web service, we call it as web service, and labels Nginx, and specs for the services. So I need to give the port mapping PORTS hyphen port is 80, and protocol is TCP, and selector is Nginx. So this is where I'm going to map. This service should map to the label, this label. Okay, so this template label will be mapped here, and then type should be. So there are this type is going to define what kind of service it is. If it is internal service, I'm going to define this as cluster IP, and this service I'm going to expose this as external IP, external service. So the type is load balancer. When I create a service, there should be a mapping for the service with the deployment, right? Otherwise, the service will never get to know for which deployment I'm going to serve this, right? So this is where I'm providing the selector, and this selector will be mapping the label under this template. So that's why I'm defining a label for the template that is selected here. Okay, this is where exactly the mapping is happening. Mapping a service with the deployment. So let me save this. Let me apply this once, then I will share it with you. So kubectl. I already told you the difference between apply and create. So I'm going to use apply. If there is any syntax issue, I want to avoid it before sharing. So you can see once I applied it, I can see the deployment is created and service is created. Let's see that. So once it is done, you go to the dashboard. This is my dashboard. I can see Nginx deployment is created because this is the deployment name I have given. It might have created 1 replica set, 4 out of 4, and 4 pods will be running. And then if I go to my services, I can see a load balancer is created. If I click on that, I can see this app.